Hello everyone, Mike Levin, August 3rd, Thursday, 2017. Around 9:30 a.m. I am running late. The Empire State Building is up there. I won't turn the camera around to show it, as I do sometimes to give perspective. If ever software is run against this to create maps of my walks in the morning, it has plenty around me already from this sample. It doesn't need the Empire State Building. And so, yeah, of course, machine learning and the much more hubris-filled term of AI is on my mind lately. You know, I realize how many different things that I've read and heard and watched about this is sort of starting to kind of play out around us. And, you know, a great example is voice recognition. Things are starting to hear what you're saying to them and respond to you, and sometimes they're listening all the time. And, you know, you got to wonder about, you know, the corporate intent behind things like Alexa and Apple Pod and Google Home, which I have to stay on top of in my field. I can't, you know, say I'm an SEO and leave this whole search taking place through smart home devices to another field to understand and tackle and such. I'm going to be doing in not too long, I imagine, what is the vocal equivalent of the old school IR blasters for people who were into home automation before all these Wi-Fi, Bluetooth enabled devices came along. You had to do it through their remote control, which were usually some form of infrared flashlight, flashing pulses. That actually was just that side of the visual spectrum. So you could actually watch it sometimes on old school video cameras, which were sensitive to more than just the human visual spectrum, which also makes them all, you know, subversive X-ray machines also, but that's another story. Yeah, so you could record anything you could do with a remote control, and so then you could play it back like a macro, and you would position this infrared flashlight blasting hub, I guess the equivalent of like a police light, so that you get full 360 coverage that could blast out a signal, blast out an instruction. And you didn't have the feedback loop, the acknowledgement that the signal was received and executed correctly. And then, of course, you had issues of things getting out of sync or out of sequence, so that once it screws up once, subsequent commands are likely to screw up as well. So home automation under that old stuff was quite fragile. And then you added Radio Shack X10, which is really you know, even more equivalent of the smart home systems, the home automation stuff. What's going on with Nest that Google bought, the smart thermostat company. All this stuff has been around forever, and there's been more primitive ways to do it, but those primitive ways are kind of not smoothly or economically upgradable. It's easier to just start fresh with some of the smart home ecosystem stuff coming from, well, everyone these days. Home automation, API control, everything is catching on. I'd like to say has caught on, but it's only caught on among the gizmo gadget elite. The rest of us, even me in the field of SEO, are just dabbling, because what do you buy? The Alexa, the Google Home, the Apple Pod, all three. Well, yeah, you know, you got to stay on top of what's happening, especially in my field. And then you make a study of it. And how do you make a systematic study? What's the equivalent of running SERP results and saving? Well, it's IR blasting voice controls and recording the response. And, you know, you got your quick answers in there, the stuff that's read back immediately. And then you have, you know, the people who search for this also search for this. And any follow-up verbal suggestions these things give you because it's all just I/O. I think people are more aware of the I/O issue, the human interface, the API between machines and human beings, more so these days than in the past, because we've got our mobile phones that do so much that was impossible just 10 years ago. The iPhone started the flood of what our expectation should be of the tiny little supercomputers we carry around in our pockets, which no one was doing back at that time because Windows CE and stuff like it kind of was too geeky. It was good for the geek elite. So, recurring trend. New tech starts out in the geek elite, those people who are nerds and willing to adopt early. And I had done that with IR blasters to achieve sub-prosumer video editing. So back in the days of the Amiga computer, and this is a cement truck, so the audio is going to be terrible for a little while. This video is for my truly hardcore devoted followers, of which, I don't know, there's about 50 of you out there, something like that. So hopefully this is the early days of my time on YouTube, and you can say you were back there when I was still unknown and the long tail of such things. So I was an early adopter of, old school automation, IR blasters to control video editors and your home, Radio Shack X10 system. None of the expensive, fancy computer controls, which did exist at that time. That was one of the big uses for Commodore computers. Home automation, brains, central brains that all this stuff hooks to. Today, those brains are out in the cloud because it's too fragile to keep at home, because you need off-site redundancy. So security is always interesting because, it used to be no data safe in the cloud. Well, your data ain't so safe at home either. So you might as well put it where people are tending to these sorts of things 24/7 at a scale you'll never match in your home, and actually trust the mechanisms built into the protocols and the physical, transport mechanisms that those protocols use to keep things end-to-end encrypted. So it's, what temperature you keep your home is nobody's business but yours. And a server at Google's, which is not going to exactly be, scanned for AdWords marketing the way your email is. Or you might start receiving ads because it sees that you keep your temperature at a ridiculously cold temperature, and that's indicative of some medical condition. And it suggests you call your doctor, especially if it's reinforced by other patterns it might pick up and see about you in your life from your smartwatch or, any of these other things. So data draws a picture. And reading that picture that data draws is very doable indeed. However, drawing those pictures from data is in its primitive state in most places, in most cases, because of various limitations in the processor power, because first you do batch processing, then you do real-time, barely keeping up, and then you have more capacity in your processors than the data stream coming in. That's kind of what happened with the human brain and the input stimuli around us, what's coming in through our eyes and our skin through touch and our equilibrium and all of our senses is within the capability of our brain and all the various subsystems divided up to handle it. Our walking is handled by our lower spinal cord, brainstem. That's in common with other, very, very primitive vertebrate animals who have much smaller brains, because that's all they need to handle that kind of stuff. And as it gets more complex, it gets layered up and layered up. And so that's exactly what we're doing with our systems now. However, in the case of human beings, you've got about 100 years, if you're lucky, running time, running space, continuous. You pull the ripcord and go, and then it plays out until such time as the matter that built up and layered up and organized and did evolution and fast forward for the single instance of this DNA molecule, folding out its factories, building its support materials and structures until, bam, you got a human being, which, of course, tries to repeat this process, but it becomes more complex with blobs of matter that keep themselves capable through fabulous networks of interdependencies with the world that you live in, the society that supports you, the mother that keeps your head up when you can't hold your head up after you're born. So, artificial intelligence is in those really, really early primitive states, with a lot of people focusing on the prefrontal cortex type thinking to create these disembodied monster, AIs, before having gone up through the walking, the way, Boston Dynamics, also bought by Google, seems to be doing. So actually they're going from both directions, the prefrontal cortex to answer your Google queries, to the, just basic motor skills, so that you can offload everything from the prefrontal cortex, capable, machine solving or problem solving machines, from the lower level machines that only have to, make the thing walk and stuff, right? So all these projects are happening along these different paths or threads or, forks or whatever, however you want to visualize them, but they're coming together over time. They're meeting in the middle. They're projects that meet in the middle. Today I'm finishing a project that meets in the middle, 100% uptime, insofar as that's possible, concurrent scheduler that I can load jobs onto and max out the capacity of my modest Amazon EC2 instance. Keep it running all the time, running jobs, and then a particular job that just as desperately needs to be run as I need to keep jobs running in general. These were two separate projects. Some days I spent a lot of time on this in that state of thinking, where I discovered such things as Circus, Python Circus package that needs to be started somehow. So I re-delved into the arcana in the Linux and Unix world that is the different startup program runners and conditionally respawners, and re-educated myself on what is part of the Unix standard under POSIX that is included in a lot of systems that derive from System 5, a very popular unifying distribution of Linux. But it takes these complex bash scripts, which didn't exist for Circus, put under initd. Okay, I get a little really nerdy now, it's true. But then I found the systemd replacement for that, which has a different philosophy, more modern, deals with a lot of concurrency issues right at that level, which is nice. I could take advantage of that, but I choose not to. I just use the systemd starter to start and keep respawn. So the config file, I have a start and I have a respawn and how often it checks that the task is still running. So I've got all that, necessary Unix/Linux startup process daemon and while running respawner stuff going on. Very important. If your task, craps out, your stuff isn't running. So that was one project here, which, by the way, I had to convince myself I needed one more thing there, which is modeled after these, supervisor D, systemd things where you put a lowercase d at the end, and it's called circusd. And it's a Python package that lets you manage your task queue, probably dealing with all the concurrency stuff and all, through a Python API, sending commands to the equivalent of a systemd, but it's a circusd that listens to you, lets you check on the jobs, send emails when jobs fail, notifications. I'll probably be able to integrate this with some free level of Twilio or something, so that I get notifications on my phone when my scripts stop running. Very important stuff. Old school sysadmin stuff modernized just enough to make good use of modern cloud stuff. You of course want to be able to replicate whatever you build and carry the process out under Ansible or something like it at some point in the future, so you can horizontally scale such an app massively if you needed to. And it's a pretty efficient use of your horizontal scaling, because you're making a pretty efficient use of a single instance. So again, it's Tetris. So playing that Tetris game with cloud services and actual real hardware, sometimes coming together with the other project, which is just hitting a bunch of APIs, pulling down data, knitting it together, putting it into a dashboard so it displays to the end stakeholders the way it needs to, and archiving off a CSV version of the same thing so that I can dump it into, say, an Amazon S3 data bucket with the date and job name or property as the key, and have all long-term trending data also stored efficiently. I'll choose whatever NoSQL type system that I can drop CSV files into and get good compression and fast lookups and stuff. So that's the reporting project coming together with the scheduling project, and bammo whammo, they connect in the middle. I connect some dots, and I'm in a very, very powerful and appropriate place professionally to take my SEO career to the next level, which I do believe is data master. Thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.